everybody for joining the webinar today for our topic, the cost of long-term care, planning for a secure future. When I think about what our clients are experiencing, for me, it's a matter of education as to what the true costs of long-term care really are. So Allie, if you would just go to the next slide. So when I think about the true costs of long-term care and how surprising the experiences for many of the clients that arrive at our firm days or weeks before, if I had asked them, how many of you really want to be a burden to your children in terms of finances or caregiving? Nobody would say, I want to be a burden to my children. How many of us aspire to live in a nursing home and be on Medicaid? Nobody comes to our office and says, you know what, I really do hope at some point I'm spent down to, $2,000 and living in a nursing home on Medicaid. But how many of us think that whatever planning we need to do, that it'll take care of it itself at the time when it's needed, that there really is nothing that you can do proactively or actually inside of a crisis, that there's no planning to be done in the moment that could actually be of any benefit. And so for me, the true costs of long-term care start with a general feeling that many of us have about wanting self-determination, not being a burden, never going to go to a nursing home, and that when and if something happens, I'll be able to deal with it, or somebody else will deal with it at that time. And for not only the clients who may have a physical or cognitive issue, the true cost of long-term care is not just measured in money. It is extremely emotional in terms of the fear that the client may feel and that the family may feel, in terms of perhaps it's been a sudden medical event like an acute stroke. Perhaps it was a very scary diagnosis. Perhaps it was a fall that created an injury. The idea is that there is a lot of uncertainty. And so the true costs for long-term care are measured in a lot of emotional impact. Physical impact, aside from the client who may actually have the physical issues, there are statistics that talk about the physical toll that caregiving takes on caregivers. The true cost of long-term care is not just money, but how it actually affects the emotional and physical aspects of the client and the family. And absolutely, there is a financial cost. And what we're going to find is that some of the things that you assumed were safety nets that would perhaps be the solution may not be. For instance, Medicare is not going to be a solution for long-term care. But what you may also find is that Medicaid, while not obviously a safety net for many people, when you understand the Medicaid rules and how they may actually, in fact, apply to you or your family member, you'll find that there are some there's definitely safety nets. If we have time at the end of the presentation, we'll also talk a little bit about the public policy changes that we're seeing, that as it might relate to Medicare and Medicaid. Next slide. As we try to find common language for this presentation, we want to just look at certain concepts the same way. And so the very first line on this graphic has, on the elder law continuum, health and ability to function. As one ages or experiences a decline in health at any age, you go from having complete independence with no limits to perhaps having some functional limitations. And those limitations, if it's a chronic issue, may actually increase to the point that you may go from being in a walker into a wheelchair and then to having to somebody direct your care with significant limited function. And obviously, the final level of the continuum of care would be when somebody passes away. When we think about this journey through the continuum of care, there's language that is used to measure the independence that someone might have. And that is usually with activities of daily living, abbreviated ADLs, like dressing, toileting, feeding yourself, transferring from bed to a chair. Obviously, the more support you need for those ADLs, you are moving up that first line to having significant limited function. Another way to move up the continuum is not necessarily with physical activities of daily living needing support, but cognitive impairment. So you may have somebody with early onset or mild cognitive impairment. You may have somebody that is at the beginning of a decline in terms of their ability to process and receive information. And while they may be able to be cued to do their activities of daily living, they have to be in a protected environment. And the level of protection that's needed can move up as they progress through their illness. So the idea is to understand that if a person actually does not pass away quickly after experiencing a health issue, the surprises come with how to manage these chronic illnesses or acute episodes that trigger a chronic illness. And then when we think about where do you get the support for activities of daily living or cognitive impairment, you need to understand what the different care settings could be. And you can see here, everybody wants to live at home. Absolutely. I've never had anybody that said, I am so ready to sell my 3-bedroom house where the washer and dryer is on the first floor and the only full bath is on the second floor. But for them, that is a house that is so important that they've lived in for probably decades, and they don't want to actually think about even moving out from living in a home. And perhaps they would bring in some home health care. Perhaps they would consider 55 plus community or a continuing care retirement community that might have different levels of care. Perhaps they might go to a Sunrise, and in our area, Sunrises are licensed as personal care residences, which are different than assisted living residences. You should know in Pennsylvania, there's a very limited number of true assisted livings. And then, of course, the highest level of care would be the nursing home. So again, when you look at what most people say before they've had an experience with long-term care, I want to stay in my house and I never want to be in a nursing home, but they often forget that there are levels of care in between home and the nursing home. And for somebody who's independent, obviously they're not spending any money on care or on support. And as you go through the continuum, obviously you have to spend more and more and more. And when you think about what the actual cost of care is, the statistic in Pennsylvania is that a nursing home level of care is over $14,000 a month. That's the average in Pennsylvania. And in our area, the actual cost can be higher. There are some that will be less. One of the surprises is, what does it cost to get home health care? The very first level, after if you're living at home and you're home with assistance, what is very important to realize is that after the pandemic, we have come to an industry now that will require, in many cases, at least 20 hours of service of home health care per week, and that the hourly rate is likely to be between $30 to $35 an hour. And so when you take somebody that needs significant support 24/7 and expect to stay at home, it's $30,000 a month. And what I would say is there are very few clients with whatever rate of savings they've had that can sustain $30,000 a month to meet the goal of staying home with home health care if required for 24/7. So when we think about how do you actually measure where somebody belongs on this continuum and what place are they going to be living and how much is it going to cost? And then how do we pay for it? We look at the final line on the graphic. There is a statistic about the millions of dollars that is unpaid uh, service of family members and friends. We have so many family members who are having a huge impact to their own careers, to their own pocketbooks, and the unpaid caregiving that is occurring is substantial, but it's not enough. And so, in some cases, people have to be convinced you've saved for a rainy day, it's raining. Perhaps we need to actually spend some of your income and assets to make sure that we keep you safe in the least restrictive setting that's possible. And if people want to remain at home, there are ways to set up care plans where you're trying to avoid the 24/7 coverage. And the next possible source is adult children's money. I've seen many cases where adult children have been paying significant amounts per month, not only just on groceries, but on many, many significant things, including home health care or managing regular household expenses. And I'll just mention as a brief footnote here, Pennsylvania took the lead on what is called filial liability many years ago when they recodified a statutory provision that made adult children financially responsible for indigent parents. Again, this could be a whole nother topic, but just understand that in terms of long-term care and long-term care planning, adult children have to be protected as well as the parents. Long-term care insurance, very few people still have long-term care insurance, and the ones that do are getting annual letters where the premiums are increasing substantially, not 30%, not 50%, sometimes 75%, not just once, but sometimes repeatedly. And so the long-term care insurance industry has gone through a transformation from when many of these policies were written, and there are very few producers at this point. And the idea is that standalone long-term care insurance is very difficult to keep and maintain. And again, another topic for another time is the alternatives to standalone long-term care insurance. Medicare. Medicare is a critical safety net, but is not one that supports families through the continuum of care. Medicare, if you're at a nursing home, may be a source of coverage for rehab, short-term acute rehab for up to 100 days. Medicare is not paying any home health care. Now, there are headlines in the past couple of years about how Medicare Advantage may include not only preventative care, but also some home health care benefits, but they have not been a significant change in terms of how we pay for home health care. Veterans benefits, another huge safety net. The idea is that many vets have benefits that they're not aware of. For instance, only 25% of wartime vets that are eligible for aid and attendance, tax-free income, are actually making those benefits available to themselves. Surviving spouses of wartime vets can also benefit from a pension. There are also veterans that have injuries and that may have a compensation and be within the VA healthcare system. Again, another source of support. And finally, we get to Medicaid. And again, many people assume that they will never be on Medicaid. And what we're going to find is that for many people, this is the one and only safety net that's available to help them through the continuum of care. Next slide. So when you think about these families that are going through this progression and needing different levels of care, what is chaotic is that the things on the bottom line, the Medicare, private pay, Medicaid, long-term care insurance, all of these sources of payment are applicable to limited areas on that continuum of care. So if you are looking for home health care and adult daycare, Medicare is not going to be paying for home health care or paying for adult daycare. You may have somebody coming to your house once or twice a week, but it is part of a Medicare benefit where you may be getting PT or OT, physical therapy or occupational therapy, which is not home health care. And it's limited by the idea that the Medicare is providing short-term acute therapy. If you are assuming that Medicaid might be helping you for long-term care at home, then you must actually answer this question. Is your gross income, yours alone, over $2,901? If it is, Medicaid in Pennsylvania has an income cap, and that income cap means that there's no opportunity, even if we rearrange your assets, for you to ever have Medicaid pay for home health care. Again, I'll drop a footnote. There are a couple categories where we do have the LIFE program. There's another options program, and there are other limited useful tools where if somebody wants to remain in the community and has excess income. But for many people over age 65, this number is a hard and fast rule. Long-term care insurance, for me, the message that I'll say is that this is nursing home avoidance insurance. I have people that have been paying privately out of their funds, not realizing that their long-term care insurance could have been and should have been triggered. If you do move to a personal care residence, just know that that is private pay, and that if you have, live in one of the few, I think it's around 60 true assisted living residences in Pennsylvania, unlike Delaware, unlike New Jersey, there is no Medicaid for assisted living in Pennsylvania. So if you're at a personal care residence, you're going to be paying privately, meaning your own resources. You're also going to be accessing your long-term care insurance if you have it. And again, for our wartime vets, we do many applications for aid and attendance. Nursing home, you may get 100 days under Medicare for skilled rehab, and there is a whole area of advocacy that relates to how to make sure you get your full 100 days of maintenance Medicare. Just know that if you're in a hospital setting, there is also a recent development about when you're admitted to a hospital and you need a 3-day stay to trigger the possibility of a 100-day coverage at a nursing home. There has been an update for the observational rules in a hospital setting. And if you are going to go into a nursing home, understand that that 2901 is not a barrier to getting Medicaid in a nursing home, and that there are complex rules that we follow for a single person versus a married person that we're going to cover. But what you need to understand is that for many, many people, Medicaid is the important safety net. And again, if you have long-term care insurance, those are resources that can also help. Now, hospice is something that, again, is an important Medicare benefit, and it can be available along the entire continuum of care. But hospice is not paying for home health care. So many times clients will say, okay, we're going to actually have mom come home. We will start the hospice, and they're assuming that the hospice provider is going to be paying for 24/7. That is not what happens. Somebody may remain in a nursing home. Hospice will not be paying for the room and board. Hospice provides for extra care, but it's not going to be paying the significant amount that families are thinking. So it's chaotic. You have these different areas where you can get support. You have Medicare, private pay, Medicaid, long-term care insurance, and it's a scramble as to how to figure out when something happens, what to do first. Next slide. So let's take a case study, a very typical case study of a married couple, and let's just look and unpack what the family might be experiencing. Next slide. So we may have a consultation with a family, and the wife is at the appointment, and she has left her husband home for just a few hours. He's safely tucked in a chair with the TV on. He's been fed, lunch, and perhaps she went out for grocery shopping. Perhaps she's at the consultation. She comes home only to find that he got out of the chair and fell. This fall could be a significant medical event. There are statistics about if there's a fall and you break your hip, how many times a broken hip can actually be the first step to mortality. And so the idea is to understand it's very difficult to say whether there has been a tipping point with this fall based on these circumstances with the limited facts, but we have all kinds of things. If nothing else, even if the husband got back in the chair and absolutely nothing else changed from an emergency point of view, this should be the cue to do some planning. Wife comes in, there are no estate planning documents. What do I mean by estate planning documents? Most people focus on getting a will, and some of them will actually include beneficiary designations for assets that pass by beneficiary. But many people don't give much thought or importance to a financial power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, a living will, also known as advance directive, and in this case, there were no estate planning documents. When was the husband seen by the primary care physician? A few years ago. That's just to suggest that perhaps there hasn't been a recent, appointment to go through some of the health issues. And this particular wife has no idea about what her asset total is. Maybe she handles the bill paying. Maybe the husband had been doing all of this material and all of a sudden this is going to be new to her. But the idea that this is how many people come to us with the idea that they are now going to have to sort out, as we looked at in the prior slide, what is the level of care? What is the right placement? What is the source of funding? Are there any safety nets? And so you come to a caregiver spouse and you have this level of confusion. How do we unpack it? We look at it as three distinct areas that require planning. When we think about estate planning, you have to get all of those documents done, but the financial power of attorney is absolutely the foundation that's used, whether it's a single person or married couple, for us to be able to respond to people changing along the continuum of care. And just to be clear, powers of attorney are not all created equal. It makes a difference who's drafting the financial power of attorney. And when you go to an elder law attorney, there will be enhancements in that financial power of attorney that dovetail with the techniques that we use. And so if you come to the planning with a power of attorney that may not actually have any of those enhancements, or maybe, from the internet, just know that you do not have, in many cases, a useful power of attorney. Care planning, the second area of work. When we think about everybody's goal, they want to stay in the least restrictive setting. As I said at the beginning, I've never had anybody come in that says, I aspire to be in a nursing home. That doesn't mean that in some cases that's the appropriate place, but in terms of the care planning, our goals are to have the person in the least restrictive setting that is safe and that we can bring the safety nets and their resources to bear to pay for it. And when we think about how our firm approaches this area of work, as a member of the Life Care Planning Law Firm Association, we have elder care coordinators. We abbreviate them as ECCs, and they are an incredible part of our team. They are someone who's deployed at the very beginning of many of our cases to go do an eyes-on assessment to determine where our client is along the continuum of care and what the potential for recovery is, so that we are looking at making sure that we're doing a proper assessment, doing contingency planning, and making sure that they're doing proper referrals and reviewing their insurance. When you think about the third area of work, it relates to that final line on that graphic. How do you sort out when to pay privately, when Medicare should be paying? how to trigger the long-term care insurance. Can we use the veterans benefits? How might we get Medicaid as a safety net? So when we have our wife in front of us, we're talking to that spouse about estate planning, care planning, asset protection planning, and whatever safety nets that we can draw upon. And that's just the beginning. Next slide. So this is a case study, which I think is extremely important for people to see with nuts and bolts, because it explains how Medicaid serves as a safety net. So if we look at this asset list and you add it together, 500,000, 300,000, 300,000, 300,000, would we ever assume that somebody with this level of wealth might be a potential Medicaid situation? And what families need to understand is that, in fact, there are spousal impoverishment rules that are in Medicaid that are applied state by state. And the federal and Pennsylvania law in this case says our home does not have to be accessed or sold. The retirement account for the healthy spouse, in this case, the wife, doesn't have to be touched. The investments of 300,000 and the husband's 300,000 retirement account, those are things that are at risk. But what we're going to see is that there is a way to have Medicaid support that community spouse, the wife, even with these particular assets. Now, in this case, we have an understanding of the assets, and at a high level, certain assets aren't even going to be relevant. But in this case, the husband's income is $2,901. We selected this number just to remind everybody that this husband could potentially get on Medicaid in the community. His income doesn't exceed that 2025 number for the income cap. Now, the wife's income is $4,500. Does that mean the husband can't get Medicaid? No. You look at the income for the spouse that's going to need the Medicaid, and the wife's income is disregarded. So in this case, what would we have to do in order to allow this husband to get Medicaid either in the community for home and community-based services, or how would we help the spouse get nursing home Medicaid? Well, you would have to look at the $300,000 of investments and the $300,000 of retirement account and understand that under the Medicaid, there is a date, a tipping point by which Medicaid assumes that one half of the assets up to a cap of about 157,000, almost 158,000 is allocated to our healthy spouse. That's called a community spouse. Said another way, out of the $600,000 that's at risk, 157,920 is going to be treated as the wife's share. All of the assets beyond that 157,920 are going to be spent down. If you want to spend down and husband is at a nursing home, you can certainly do that, $14,000 a month. But under the Medicaid rules, there is a way to take the investments and the net proceeds of the husband's retirement account and have the community spouse, the wife, purchase what's called a DRA annuity. This annuity is able to protect the community spouse by taking those assets and turning those assets into an income stream to help her remain in the community. In order for this annuity to have validity under Medicaid, it does require that the primary beneficiary in most cases be the Medicaid agency, which is the Department of Human Services. These Medicaid annuities are things that were built into the big change in Medicaid that occurred with the Deficit Reduction Act of 2006. This was the change which made the 3-year look-back rule a 5-year look-back, the penalty start date to be the Medicaid application, which is very confusing. But the bottom line is, at the very same time, there were things built into the Medicaid changes which permitted annuities to be a way to take resources and turn them into this income stream. Now, there are many people who could be getting help for home and community-based Medicaid, but will go no further because they don't know or understand what estate recovery means. In this case, let's go through a typical example. The real estate, the house, is owned typically by husband and wife, and if you move the house to the wife alone, there is no transfer penalty under Medicaid for gifts between spouses. And when this husband dies, Pennsylvania's estate recovery, the way it's designed right now, does not apply to the house any longer. The house is in the wife's name. Pennsylvania at this moment only applies estate recovery to probate assets in the husband's name. This is not a probate asset while it's joint, but it's certainly not a probate asset that the husband owns when it's been moved to the wife. So again, as you go through these circumstances, don't assume that there are rules that are absolute barriers to your circumstances, and make sure you get correct, updated legal advice. Then there are some families who will say, wait a minute, I understand that I need to have a parent or a spouse move to a nursing home, but I don't want to have my family member go into any nursing home that takes Medicaid, as if a facility that accepts Medicaid somehow is going to have deficiencies, where a nursing home that doesn't accept Medicaid would be, considered to be better. In fact, if you go to medicare.gov, Nursing Home Compare, and by any county, look at the list of nursing homes that take Medicare and Medicaid, probably 75% or more out of each county will accept Medicaid. And what you will find is the 5-star rating system that's set up on medicare.gov, Nursing Home Compare. You will find those that take Medicaid and don't take Medicaid, and some will all have, a 1-star rating up to a 5-star rating. You have to look at the rating and understand this is one piece of evidence as to the quality of a facility, and you cannot just generically say that any nursing home that accepts Medicaid is a bad nursing home. So in this case, the bottom line is that many times when I'm sitting there talking to our healthy spouse, and again, looking at estate planning, we're going to have to get powers of attorney done. Her will may not any longer be a sweetheart will that says, if I die first, I'll give everything to my husband. He may no longer be appropriate to be her power of attorney or make medical decisions for her. So estate planning is very, very important. Care planning, we're taking care of the husband and we're also taking care of the wife, and rearranging the finances and making sure that if we're applying for Medicaid, we look back the 5 years, we look to see, are there any things, any items that are going to be reviewed by Medicaid that we need to actually disclose and handle. So again, there's a lot of work when you have somebody that is married and needs to actually rearrange estate planning, care planning, and Medicaid. Let's look at another situation. Next slide. Sometimes we have single people, and we have single people that have children living across the street in the same neighborhood, and we have single people who do not have any adult children or any spouse or any close family that's going to support them, those solo seniors. When we think about typical cases, though, we have many, many adult children who, again, are trying to do everything they can as best as they can, but not having a roadmap and not realizing how to actually approach the situation so that you are doing what needs to be done right now and to proactively plan for what the next level of care might be. And how many times have adult children come in and said, my mom needs care, but I can't keep this up? Next slide. So when you think about, again, a typical scenario, when a child who has a power of attorney comes in for a consultation, she may be sitting here sharing the story and saying mom is in her house. Perhaps mom is on the call. Maybe mom is actually here at the office. And the idea is that mom doesn't want any help. It's not that she won't even consider moving to personal care like a Sunrise Senior Living. She does not want even 4 hours of home health care. She doesn't want anybody coming in to even assist her with bathing. Mom wants no help. And as an accommodation, daughter who still has to work has cameras, baby monitors, checks in, before leaving for work, checks in after work, takes turns with perhaps other siblings coverage for weekend. Mom is insisting that the care be all family related. Daughter or son does all of the shopping, doctor appointments, and yet also has 3 children of her own. There is the sandwich generation. And daughter has added her name to the bank account and does her bill paying. So daughter thinks she's got everything she needs to be able to take care of mom's finances. So that's a very typical situation where people are doing the best they can. Now, when you think about when we meet with this family, with this client, the idea is, again, to focus the family's attention on estate planning, care planning, and financial planning, not the type of financial planning that's investments, but the idea of looking to see what is it as a source of payment that we need to do and evaluate so that we're prepared for Medicaid or VA now or later. So for the estate planning, the idea is to understand that the daughter who went to the bank and added her name to a bank account does not actually have any authority as an agent under a financial power of attorney. Even if she's on every single bank account, that is not the same thing as being a financial power of attorney, an agent. And so when we give our clients their new documents, which will include a very powerful 25-page financial power of attorney, that daughter in this situation may take our brand new power of attorney to a bank, any bank. We don't have to pick on any of them. They're all going to do the same thing. And they'll say, you know what? Rather than kick up this power of attorney to the legal department, why don't we just add, if it hasn't been done, we'll just add the daughter on as a joint owner. I want you to be alerted to this situation and really understand that we don't want adult children to be joint owners of bank accounts as a way to become a surrogate decision maker. We want the adult child to have a financial power of attorney. And yes, the bank may have to kick it up to the legal department, but that's what we're asking them to do. And again, we want the adult child to have a financial power of attorney naming her so that when it comes time to sign any contracts on behalf of her mother, she is signing as an agent, not as an individual who could then be labeled as a responsible party. So this financial power of attorney is a huge tool for the parent, but as well as the child in terms of giving that child protection as an agent, gives them a scope of authority, and makes it clear that this is the person who has assumed responsibility as a fiduciary to manage mom's finances. Estate planning, care planning. In this case, mom is determined not to get any care. And what I would say is that this resistance is not unusual and is not something that is going to be managed with a single conversation, and that it is a process. And what I find is that our elder care coordinators, our ECCs, build the confidence of our caregiver children and also work to explain the context to the parent so that they understand their self-determination is important, but is not necessarily the key to being able to provide everything that they want, and to be able to do a proper assessment, to develop a care plan that respects the self-determination as best as we can, and to make those referrals and insurance. What I have observed is that in many cases that are truly challenging, the difficulty comes when the parent has cognitive impairment but is still a very strong personality, and that the adult children are not comfortable assuming the role as the primary decision maker for the care planning. And so those cases, I think, have to move slowly and carefully and just understand that that process is something that we've seen and that we're able to help work with. Estate planning, care planning, and then asset protection planning. How are we going to finance mom's long-term care? Well, perhaps mom would consider getting home and community-based services, abbreviated here as HCBS. Well, we have to at least make sure that mom and daughter understand that using home health care the proper way is going to mean that somebody is not just sitting on a sofa looking at a phone, but actually engaging mom and helping with meal prep and making sure that there's actual support here, how to actually use home and community-based services. And perhaps it could include adult daycare, which is an incredible resource. And for people that are helped by having a social situation, it is extremely important because there are some people who bloom very much with adult daycare. There are some cases where when we're dealing with financing long-term care, we use personal service contracts. We can sometimes use them in the context of veterans benefits planning. We can sometimes use them in the context of Medicaid planning. We sometimes use them because there are certain adult children who are assuming the burden of worry very directly for a parent, and they need to actually be compensated for lost wages, shared housing expenses, and those things are to be included in a personal service contract because many times a will is going to say, I treat all my children equally, but yet we have one child who the parent very much may want to have be treated differently, and this is the fair way to do it. In terms of asset protection planning, this is such a case-specific concept, and there are so many things where asset protection planning means different things for different types of cases. We have some families with businesses, income-producing property, disabled grandchildren. We have siblings living together. We have children who have been caregivers for more than 2 years and have no other place to live but the parents' house. What we do by way of asset protection planning is powerful and is case specific, and many times families have no idea that there's planning even possible. So in terms of our elder care planning for a single person, estate planning, care planning, and finances and Medicaid. So let's just go through, next slide, apply Medicaid to a particular single person situation. We have a house, $500,000 with a home equity line of credit, investments of $100,000. The parent's income is $2,902. Well, wait a minute, isn't that one more dollar than she can have and still get on that Medicaid waiver, the home and community-based? Yes. Just to mention, at this moment, there is an ability to disregard up to $500 of excess income by the generosity of Achieva Family Trust and DHS. So there is a small opportunity for certain cases to keep people out of a nursing home on Medicaid and getting support, even if their income is over 2901. But it is extremely important to understand that it's no more than $500, and there is a documentation requirement every month to show you've spent your excess income. In this case, what if we had a child who has been living with the parent for more than 2 years, and our elder care coordinator reviews the medical records and says, you know what, this parent has been so significantly impaired that they could have been in a nursing home over 2 years ago. If this caregiver child has no other residence and is provided the care, there is federal law and state law that allows this child to be gifted the house that has a value of $500,000 without imposing any transfer penalty. So just know that if you're a caregiver child, there not only is there a personal service contract that may be applicable, there's this caregiver child exception. Under the category of the house, I can only tell you how many times I have seen families assume that they've protected the house by selling the house for $1 before they come in for our appointment. Selling the house for $1 is a gift, and a gift of $500,000 creates a very large floating transfer penalty that will be relevant for the 60 months after the gift was made. And there is, a floating penalty, but there's also an income tax issue when the home is sold. It's no longer the parent's primary residence. The Internal Revenue Code says, well, if you sell your primary residence as a single person, you can exclude $250,000 worth of capital gains. Well, this adult child perhaps doesn't live in the house, hasn't owned it, hasn't used it as a primary residence, and this house that was sold for $1 can cause them an income tax problem later on. And not on the slide, just another explanation that if the parent continued to live in the house, there's still going to be inheritance tax. So again, what seems to be a simple deed is not so simple. And I encourage you not to do any transfers of primary residence or assets without getting advice beforehand. And again, this single person, if there's a personal service contract, our elder care coordinators are putting a fair market value on these services. And what I would say is that in many cases, the investments of $100,000 will be used plus the income to help pay the adult child that's paying for the services. This slide is an example of a case that we had where the home was gifted to the caregiver child. So the $500,000 was transferred, but before it was transferred, the investments of $100,000 were used to pay off the home equity line of credit. How many of us would have thought that this would actually be a Medicaid case? Again, when you are trying to do estate planning, care planning, asset protection planning, perhaps Medicaid, you have to understand that it's a three-dimensional chess game, and you need to be able to do it with good guidance. Next slide. So, and we've just spent a good chunk of time talking about just the finances, just the Medicaid. And what I want everyone to hear is that it's not just about the finances. It's not just about getting somebody on Medicaid. It is about keeping somebody safe. And when you think about the continuum of care, as people go from home to hospital, hospital to rehab, rehab back to home, or rehab with Medicare terminating and staying long-term care, every transition through that continuum of care is an opportunity for my client to fall into a crack. And so by actually having our life care planning services, where we're continuously looking at estate planning, care planning, and asset protection planning, I think many families would agree that the biggest value that we have is the idea that we understand the continuum of care and are helping navigate the journey through the different levels of care with advocacy and with education. So again, the value of what we do isn't just measured in dollars. So I'm going to just stop and see if there are any questions.
Linda, we do have a couple questions. I can read them off to you.
Thank you.
This one is regarding a CCRC. So if a CCRC is sold to another entity, is the new owner obligated to honor the original contract the resident signed? Can they raise the monthly rent and or reduce the refund of the portion of the entrance fee as in the original contract?
Okay. So when you think about a continuing care retirement community, a CCRC, this is actually an insurance product and is regulated by the Pennsylvania Department of Insurance. And so the contract that you sign for your admission is the contract. And there are CCRCs that perhaps have gone into bankruptcy, maybe not even just sold, but actually in bankruptcy. And the Department of Insurance, different states have different approaches. And for Pennsylvania, unlike New Jersey, it's not quite as strong and robust as New Jersey's protection is. But when you think about what has happened is that in many cases, even with a bankruptcy, the bankruptcy was a reorganization and the contracts were not actually renegotiated. The financial setting of the CCRC was actually reorganized in creditor claims. But in terms of creditors, you don't miss the point, which is that potential for refunds is also a creditor issue. So there is generally, due diligence that you should do before moving into a CCRC, continuing care retirement community, to actually look at the disclosure that you're given to see what are what are the strengths of the financial picture for this CCRC. And I know there are accountants and there are actuaries that will actually assist you in applying some ratios and understanding it. But as a resident of a CCRC, it can be very scary to think, well, wait a minute, what if? And I would say, what if is something that, up to this point we have experience and we, can say, at least in Pennsylvania, I haven't had any CCRC that I'm aware of absolutely close. I've seen other standalone personal care, places close, but not a CCRC. So I think the takeaway messages are to make sure you understand that this is an insurance product regulated by the Department of Insurance, is based on contract and what your contract rights are, and that you can look at the financial strength of a CCRC before you move in and on an annual basis.
Okay. The next question. Does this 2901 income cap include Social Security? If a person receives more than this number as Social Security, they are not MA eligible? Question.
Okay. So 2901 is an important number when you're analyzing Medicaid. And there's Medicaid for when you want to stay home, and there's Medicaid if you're in a nursing home. 2901 relates to the Medicaid when you want to stay home. 2901 means they're measuring all sources of income that are in your name, and they're looking at the gross income before any deductions, before any payment of Medicare, insurance, taxes, anything. And if you have Social Security that's over 2901, you appear to have excess income that would not let you get Medicaid for home and community-based Medicaid. Having said that, there are a couple pathways, limited pathways in Pennsylvania to still stay home and have excess income. One is the idea of being able to disregard up to $500, $500 on top of 2901. Certain limited categories like the LIFE program where you can spend down. So when you think about every single person at the very beginning who says, I will never go into a nursing home, I want to stay at my house. And if their income is over 2901, we know by just the sheer math right now that it doesn't appear that Medicaid will be a safety net for the community Medicaid.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. And
Okay.
then last question before we wrap up. What do you mean when you say a nursing home does not accept Medicaid?
When you think about what sources of payments nursing homes accept, all of them will have private pay. Some of them will have Medicare. And then there are some nursing homes that choose not to accept Medicaid. Many of those nursing homes are part of continuing care retirement communities, CCRCs. So in our area, if you were to go to Granite Farms or Lima Estates, Riddle Village, they do not have Medicaid at the nursing home level. Compare that with other CCRCs in our area, Marist Grove, Wesley Enhanced Living. At the nursing home level, they do accept Medicaid. And so when you think about CCRCs, most of them don't accept Medicaid. When you think about most nursing homes, most of them will, that are standalone nursing homes. Is that it for the questions?
That's it for the questions.
Okay. So if you go to the next slide, there we go. Finances and elder law. These are all the things that people want to talk about. And again, we're out of time, but we will be doing more webinars in the future. If any of these ideas sound important to you, please feel free to let us know, and we will put it on the top of the list. And just know that, with I think with the minute that I have left, I'll just add some comments about, how the calls that I'm getting from prior clients, new clients, people that aren't clients, all wondering in this very turbulent political environment, what does all of this mean as somebody who is concerned about Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security? And what I would say is that we are definitely living in a time when things are moving and moving quickly. It's a time for advocacy. There are nonprofits that are putting out a lot of really important information. Justice and Aging, Center for Medicare Advocacy, the Special Needs Alliance. Again, you can look for sources of information that don't have a lot of political motivation, but that still capture this moment in time where we are looking at whether we want to continue to fund Medicare and Medicaid at the same level we have always done. And what I would say is that the budget process right now is likely to result in a very significant decision to reduce the Medicaid funding substantially over the next 8 years. So again, put this on your radar. And for those that are vulnerable and in care right now, it means that we have to be careful of how our Medicaid rules may change. For those of you who are not in care right now, but want to see your aging plan actually come to fruition, if you say to me, I never want to be in a nursing home on Medicaid, then you need to make sure you get your estate planning done, which will include a very strong financial power of attorney, and talk to financial advisors, not about standalone long-term care insurance, but about hybrid products for long-term care insurance. There's a rider for an annuity or insurance. So there is a reorganization going on, and everybody has to participate.
Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today. We hope this session was informative. If you missed anything or want to watch again, we'll be posting the full recording on our website by the end of the week. Just go to andersonelderlaw.com, and then you can head to resources and then our video library section, and it'll be all the way at the bottom. And then just also keep an eye out on your inbox. We'll be sending out an email and flyer soon for our next webinar in May. That's what that one's going to focus on, estate planning. So have a great day, and thank you again, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.